Hi there, welcome. This is the Kelly's Astrology podcast, where you can find insight, guidance, and understanding through astrology. I'm Kelly, and I'll be your host. Hey there, everyone, and welcome back. Today, I have a really fun episode for you. I am going to be talking with Brian Forman, who is an astrologer. He's also a graduate in my astrology training program, and he's also working with a technique called horary astrology. So that's a little bit about Brian. Welcome, Brian.
Thanks, Kelly. It's always great to be with you.
Yeah, it's so fun. I'm so looking forward to our chat today. So we are going to be talking about the Ascendant ruling planet today. And this is something that we learn about, especially in Hellenistic or traditional styles of astrology, as being a really important planet in the chart. So we're going to talk about why is the Ascendant ruling planet really important. And we're also going to run through each of the 7 options. So if you know what your Ascendant or rising sign is, we're going to talk briefly about what your Ascendant ruling planet kind of indicates for you, I guess. And this is a topic, is this a topic that you find you're very passionate about, Brian, or that you're talking with clients about all the time?
Yeah, I find it fascinating, especially through the lens of traditional astrology, because if you look at the chart through the lens of traditional astrology, you're just one part or one planet in the chart, and then your life, your money, your friends, your partners, your career are all represented by different planets in different parts of the chart. So I find this particularly interesting, and especially in through the lens of horary, the ruler of the ascendant is the person asking the question. So that's where it gets really interesting as well.
It's so fun, isn't it? That's one of the things I really just resonated with so deeply when I made my way to traditional astrology was this idea that your chart is really your whole life, and it has planets and places inside your chart that represent other people in your life. I had a session with a client this week, and we're talking about some 7th house stuff, and I'm like, so how is your husband experiencing this? Because in the chart, the 7th house, it isn't you, it's the partner that you are in relationship with. And when we look at the chart that way, to have a planet that is just you and to have one of these 7 sort of motifs or planetary archetypes that we're kind of all working with, I love thinking about people and their personalities through the lens of that ascendant. Is it a Saturn ruled ascendant or a Mars ruled ascendant? And we're starting from a very unique place, even just with that info.
Exactly. Yeah, and it becomes a very interesting opportunity for self-reflection as you can think about, how am I like this planet, or how is my life like this planet, or how do I move toward happiness and what I want to get out of life in the way that this planet, is characterized. And that can also be another interesting thing to explore, like how are my partners Saturnian, or how might I want to be in a relationship with a Saturnian type person? So there's all kinds of interesting avenues to explore there.
And I think one of the great things about this too is, the more you get into astrology, the more that you realize it absolutely comes down to understanding the planets. The planets as the kind of the doers or the activators. And there's different ways of categorizing or understanding the condition and the effectiveness of different planets. But it's really just all about various nuances to do with the planets. And so to at least be able to identify this planet says something really integral about the essence of who I am. Because I know there's some very poetic ways of thinking about the ascendant and how that represents life and the breath, who we are. And I guess this doctrine kind of flows from that. So do you have any particular ways that you like to talk about the ascendant when you're sharing astrology with people?
Yeah, I mean, I like to think of the ascendant as the most personal, the most sensitive, the most vital. It's the most unique and also the most important part of the chart, because it's when you took your first breath, when you were born. That's the sign of the zodiac that was rising on the eastern horizon. And so where it gets really interesting, and this is what we'll get into in a little bit here, is that each sign has a planet that's responsible for what happens in that sign. And this is where we use the word ruler and sometimes lord in traditional astrology. I kind of giggle about the Lord word because it has such the Lord.
Such a weird connotation.
Yeah, there's some really funny terms in traditional astrology, but in my studies with Dr. Benjamin Dykes, I've really become interested in this word management or manager. That comes, I think, from the Persian astrologers, and it's this idea that a planet is not just the lord or the ruler, because if we when that word and can kind of produce this image that there's just someone sitting on a throne, but when we use the word manager, I think that brings a lot more life into what a planet is doing. And so the sign, your rising sign or your ascendant, is managed by a planet. And we can think of that planet sort of being responsible for managing your life. And so this is where we'll get into how are you sort of archetypally like that planet, and how do you move towards happiness and what you really want to get out of life in a way that's characteristic of that planet.
I love the manager phrase as well. You know, I think that is from the Persian period, and then in the ancient Greek period, we have the helmsman, or sometimes I'll use helmsperson just to be a little bit more inclusive. And both of those terms have a more active quality to them. Like, you know, you think about a manager or like when we think about the helmsperson, the image is like sort of the planet that might have its hands on the steering wheel of life, so to speak. And so there's something about the activeness of the involvement of that managing planet that is participating in driving the life forward, you know, perhaps occasionally setting the direction or choosing the style of movement that is to go forward. And that's really important to think about, because everybody moves forward in different ways. You know, we all have different pacing. We have different levels of follow through, for instance. We have different levels of focus versus being easily distracted. And certain planets, you know, they all have pros and cons about them in terms of things that they will more naturally be inclined towards and things that they will have less interest in, I guess. So I love that manager because it's really sort of denotes that active component.
Exactly. And I don't want to get too much far off topic, but one metaphor or sort of analogy that I'd like to bring in is something from Demetra when she's talking about planets being in signs and ruling or managing other signs. Is this, if you think of like a restaurant, everyone at the restaurant has a different job, but they're all at the restaurant. So that would be like planets in a house. They're all
the same place.
House.
Yes. Yeah.
But everyone at the restaurant is working there for a different reason. So one of the people at the restaurant or one of the planets in the house might have a crush on the cook. So they might have 7,000 matters that are sort of driving them to, you know, to be at work. Whereas maybe one of the servers is putting themselves through school, or maybe they're taking care of children. And so those topics become sort of the driving force that's moving them into, or motivating them, maybe is another word, into those topics.
Yeah, that's such a great analogy, isn't it?
I love it. Yeah. It really also, I think, highlights, you know, thinking of planets as people or having these kind of personalities and qualities. And so with that, you know, we can look at the planet that's managing the ascendant as the planet that kind of tells us more about what you're going for in life, I mean, what you're interested in. And it can also be, I was just reading some of Demetra's work, in this idea, pneuma is the Greek word for spirit. And some of that is kind of that like life force, you know, that's the wind in the sails, or it's kind of driving the ship forward. Yeah. And so it can even talk about what makes you happy, and also kind of the grit and the stuff you're made of in life. And so this is where it gets interesting about who is that planet that's managing your life, and how are you like that planet? How do you move your life in the direction that has some of those planetary qualities.
Yeah, I love that idea of the pneuma, the breath, the life, the essence. So it's sort of like the animating ether, if you like, to what kind of things are you animated towards or by, if you like what calls you alive or calls you forward.
Yes.
Yeah,
it's beautiful to think of the breath, like when your first breath when you're born and you're infused with that life force. So it becomes beautiful and poetic.
It is poetic, is it? And this is, I know it's sometimes a criticism against traditional styles of astrology because the techniques are, fairly structured. However, the kind of inspiring principles and the guiding philosophies within traditional astrology actually does have some of this, what feels like poetry in it.
Truly. Yeah.
And, when you talk about that breath and that first breath, and then I think about, obviously as adults, we're all long past the first breath, but we all have those really pivotal moments in life that the way we meet them is by reconnecting with our breath.
Oh, I love that.
Like that idea of as we center, we come back to what was that first principle? What was that first animating thing?
Mm-hmm.
And as we remember ourselves, it helps us understand the best way forward, if you like.
I love that. As you're saying that, I'm just thinking about looking to the planet ruling or managing the ascendant as like a touchstone. Maybe there's something there to explore in terms of authenticity when I'm feeling off course.
Yes.
How can I get back to the best of Saturn or the best of the sun? Or, maybe I'm getting into other territory that actually isn't me and isn't true to what I'm here to do.
Yes. Yeah. You might be picking up something to do with another planet or another priority in your chart, which could come from someone else or somewhere else.
Exactly. Culture has a pretty profound influence on us.
Totally. That nature versus nurture. Sometimes a lot of our adult life is helping us, come back to our nature and away from the nurturing, influences or factors.
Right.
Okay. So I know we could talk about the ascendant for days, but I feel like people would definitely be curious about these 7 different planets. And of course, because this is a technique from much older styles of astrology, we are using those 7 original visible planets. So when we're talking about like the manager or the ruler of your ascendant, your options are that your ascendant could be ruled by the sun or moon, by Mercury, Venus, Mars, or Jupiter or Saturn. So there's just one of those 7 pieces. So which one do you want to start with, Brian?
So we start with the moon?
Yes, let's do it. I love it.
Okay. So what comes to mind for you when you think of moon? Like if we think Cancer rising, moon ruling the ascendant, managing the life, what do you think of?
It's so there's so many things all at once. So, so anyone with Cancer rising, of course, has the moon as the manager or the ruler. That's the standard template, I guess. And so I think about the watery wetness of Cancer and the moon. So I think about the felt sense, that sort of embodied, visceral knowledge or wisdom that a person with a Cancer rising is learning to be in touch with or to draw from. And of course, I think about classic things like mood and memory. I think about how foundational nurturing will often be for that person, and that there can be a mix of developing really nourishing, nurturing practices for the self. There'll often be a set of people or a particular topic or theme in the life that nurturing might be directed towards. And that, of course, would be like, where is the moon in the chart? But I know we don't want to get too in the weeds here because we could.
That's the next step for sure, though.
Yeah. But it is. And then, of course, I know that in older styles of thinking about the moon is a planet about both language and about movement. So the idea of, whether it's words or knowledge, I know there's a lot of language that goes with the planet Mercury, but there is a component of the mindset or the mental self that does come from the moon. So I think that's often important, the articulation or the reflection of ideas and feelings. And then, of course, the moon was a planet associated with travel historically. because it moved so much. It was the quickest moving planet. It was in different parts of the sky, in different shapes. It was constantly on the go. So I find that with Cancer risings, we either get one of two sort of key archetypes. We either get the home, domestic, like I want to be, that sort of, I want to be in a place that's familiar, or we get the movement side of the moon coming through. What about you? How do you think about the Cancer rising moon manager kind of chart?
Yeah. One thing I wanted to mention is, we're talking about kind of the purest expression of planets right now as we go through these, and they'll all be sort of tempered or influenced or modified by other things like the sign, house, sign in which they're located, house, and then also aspects and things like that. Their condition, can make this moon, the way it's expressed, more toward sort of the nurture side versus the
movement side.
Travel and the movement. But as you were talking about the travel piece, one of the ancient significations that I find very interesting with the moon is wanderings.
Yes.
And this has been something that I've mentioned in a few sessions with clients recently that has really resonated. Just this idea of needing movement.
Yeah.
Of needing to, to kind of honor that idea of fluctuation that the moon is characterized by. So I think there's this fluid, dynamic, and changeable quality that, if you're a Cancer rising, that you're, I think, invited to sort of own and honor in yourself.
Yeah.
That there can be this idea or this passion for wandering, or this need to kind of be in a state of flux. And I think about the intuitive nature of the moon and how it sort of picks up its environment, like it transmits the influences of the planets down to Earth. And so this can be a quality that we see in people who are moon ruled as well, as, just sort of being very sensitive and sort of porous almost to their immediate environment.
Yeah.
And being sort of a medium or a go-between in that way. And one other thing I'll mention is we usually look at the midheaven and 10th house for things related to career, but I've learned recently that the ruler of the ascendant is, sometimes even more significant when we're looking at professions. So this can be things like people who work with water or live near the water or deal with water, but also like psychics and intuitives and people who, nursing or caregiving, things like that.
Yeah, there's such an
just to name a few.
Yeah, such an absorbent quality to that Cancer ascendant that I think most water sign risings have this, but of course there's only one water sign rising that's ruled by the moon. So that sort of almost felt or feeling into the interpersonal space is something that the Cancer rising chart can do so beautifully. And I guess like something you said earlier that, we're sort of talking about Cancer rising with the moon as the manager and just weaving in some of the wandering energy or that very emotive energy and that almost intuitive energy of the moon into the personality of the Cancer rising. But that ultimately there are 12 different types of Cancer rising chart depending on where the moon is. So of course, the planet and its actual place in the chart will add more. But I do this particularly in my personal life, like with friends and family members all the time. I'm constantly thinking, that's right, they're a Mars ruled ascendant, or that's right, they're a Mercury ruled ascendant. And it's such a good reminder when you're interacting with people to come back to that sort of primary orientation for
Yes.
Yeah.
I was talking with a friend recently who has the sun in Scorpio, and she, has said that she doesn't really resonate with much of the sun sign significations, but she's Taurus rising and she's an artist, and, there's all this Venusian. I mean, her life has been so characterized by art and beauty and music and dancing and things like that, that it really struck a chord. So, yeah.
When you said that, it reminded me, often when people find out that you're an astrologer, there's a period of time where people are like, guess my sign,
Mhm.
and I very quickly realized I didn't want to guess anyone's sign, because what I would guess is something to
It's
do with
their
their ascendant.
ascendant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd be like, oh, I'm picking up such a strong Venus signature. And they'd be like,
Yeah.
ha, astrology's wrong. I'm a Gemini. And then we'd get into their chart and they'd have like this Libra rising with this really strong Venus signature. And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, that is really important for you. So I think
Yeah.
it's good to make that distinction.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the Cancer rising.
Mhm.
What planet / signs do you want to go to Mercury next, or do you want to
Sure.
go there?
Yeah, we can just go up
up the order?
in order.
Yep.
Mhm.
So, okay, so Gemini rising and Virgo rising are both managed or ruled by Mercury. And so here we have a totally different personality type. How do you dive in with the Mercury ruled ascendants?
Yeah, there's so much to say, but as I was thinking about this conversation that we're going to have, I kept thinking about how many people I know and that I've met with who are either Gemini or Virgo rising and use their hands in some way, or they use their
Yes.
arms,
Yeah.
hands, either, as professionally, like I think of maybe the most, like, I think of Paul McCartney, and he's
Yes.
so talented, being able to
Yeah.
play bass and sing at the same time.
Yeah.
Virgo rising. So there's this, I think this emphasis on like anything that requires dexterity with the hands. Like I have a friend who's got a lot of Virgo rising, and is constantly knitting.
Yes.
Like
Oh my gosh, keeping their hands
crafts and things like that.
Yes.
Yes. But also Mercury, of course, has to do with words and numbers and calculations and even mental gymnastics.
Yes.
Gymnastics, like, also, and I think wrestling are mercurial things, but also this kind of, mental gymnastics of using and working with calculations and data and figures and facts. Usually people who are Mercury ruled have very busy minds, and there needs to be some sort of outlet to kind of channel all that. Like I think it could be called like the wind of the mind, right? Like maybe some ancient descriptions about the wind of the mind and how you need to have an outlet for that. So yeah, professions involving the hands, self-expression. I find that people often play music. Like I know that that's more of a Venusian thing, but this is just kind of my own research, is like many Mercury ruled people are artistically talented, particularly through playing an instrument, which requires
the dexterity,
the hands and the dexterity. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think of debate too, like a quick wit debate, like,
yes.
It's
like wordplay and like fun with words, word nerds, but also anything to do with that intellectual activity. I think you said like the wind of the mind. So problem solving or strategizing or, gathering the data and then playing around in that space of like, we just have all the facts or all the information. So there's like a strategy problem solving piece in terms of like, how do we get to a solution? And it's slightly different in Gemini versus Virgo, but the orientation, I think, is there, that we want to articulate things, we want to put them into language. I also find a little bit of a social piece where, again, maybe one of the Mercury ruled signs a little more than the other, but that sense of we don't want to be too isolated. We do want to be with people where we can have that exchange of ideas or that kind of intellectual, I think you mentioned like debate and discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Let's do kind of learning through talking as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Talking or writing, I guess. Yeah. So very intellectual. And there's a lot of movement there, isn't there? Because Mercury is one of those planets. It's not like the most movable planet like the moon, but Mercury has a lot of variability to its physical path through the heavens. And I think that's where we see a lot of the nimbleness that comes with the Gemini ruled ascendants, that idea of, well, we can stretch to here, or we can go to there, or we can adapt, or we can keep things in motion, I guess.
Yeah, if we think about those two mutable signs that Mercury rules, and much like the moon, and there is some crossover with significations, and especially in the ancient literature, we can see people who are dynamic in, in their identity or who they are, and
Yeah.
and also have sort of that kind of shifting quality that the moon does as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
We're not settling for too long. Unless
right.
there's something specific to Mercury in that chart that might change that. But Mercury in its purest expression is, wants to keep that nimbleness going.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. They're so fun. I had a client earlier this week who has a Mercury ruled ascendant and has Mercury right on the ascendant. And she's one of the quieter kind of Mercury ascendant types, but she's got this like engineering math background. So that's sort of like really problem solving. The intellect is the realm that she is so happy in.
Yeah, I think there's like a Abumashtar, or one of the significations is like wanting to excel in the sciences for Mercury. Is one of the
because that's like asking and answering questions.
Exactly.
Like figuring out how to answer big questions kind of thing.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And of course we could talk about Mercury for days, but we need to give Venus some attention. So the next pair of rising signs would be the Venus-ruled pair, which would be Taurus or Libra. And, the signs are different elementally and in terms of modality. Like we have fixed earth Taurus, we have cardinal air Libra, but they do have this Venus quality in common. So what is it that you go to for thinking about a Venus person, Brian?
I was thinking about being like a sort of a mediator or an ambassador, or making peace, bringing people together, bringing parties together, this kind of social cohesion.
Cohesion, yeah.
And then also just this emphasis on pleasure. Like my friend who I mentioned, who is a Scorpio sun, but Taurus rising. Yeah, she's constantly like, everything tastes good all the time. And there's like, we walked into this is actually what started the conversation, is we walked into a grocery store and they had like a essential oil diffuser. And she was like, what is that smell? And so it started this thing where I was like, oh, this is, so Venusian of you. And we got into that. But yeah, the kind of the finer things in life. There can also be, everybody wants to experience pleasure. That's a very like human experience, right? But there can be a pretty strong emphasis on this, I think, in a Venus-ruled person.
I think to your point, like everybody wants to experience pleasure, but some of us are delaying that or pushing it away for other things first, whereas the Venus-ruled ascendant is more likely to put that pleasure first or to make it a priority, like further up the list. I always think about little luxuries for Venus-ruled ascendant. So can we make this a little bit more pleasant or a little bit more comfortable or a little bit more enjoyable? And it's not, sometimes people hear that and they think, okay, luxury or expensive. And I don't know that Venus is necessarily like lavish in that regard, but there is something, the Venus-ruled ascendants, there's something about appreciating quality or appreciating the experience and wanting to make it, whether it's as fun, as like sociable or as pleasurable kind of as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I sort of laughed when I read one of the significations is an abundance of craving for everything.
Yes.
For Venus.
Yes.
So, like the chocolate, the thing, the flowers on the table,
there's like a sweetness.
A little sweeter.
Yes. And the sweetness can be very literal, like chocolate or sweet, like foods that are sweet. But it can also be, I want this interaction to be sweet and pleasant. So it may not be oriented towards like competition or may not love conflict, but is going to do that, like, how do we compromise or how do we find our way? And then I think you might have touched on the art or the beauty or the creativity, that there's sort of an instinct that Venus-ruled ascendant charts have towards beauty or the enjoyment of other people's artistic output. So even if the person isn't explicitly creative or artistic themselves. Sometimes there's just a real love of art or beauty or culture, like making space for that in life. Yeah.
Yeah, like a passion for that, a passion for beauty, a passion for art.
Yeah.
Maybe even some element of flirtation or kind of playing with life,
Yeah.
Um,
Like a bit of a charm or more. Yeah. And I do think there is something, that cohesive energy, one of the core principles of Venus as a planet is this unification or to pull together. And so there's an orientation often towards collaboration or, whether like working with people rather than working in isolation. At least that's where Venus often starts from.
Yep.
Yeah. And we all need a little bit more Venus in our lives.
We do. Venus is almost on the ascendant as we record this. So.
As we're recording this. Oh my gosh, I love that.
That's fun.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Okay, so after Venus, we come to the sun. And so we're looking now at the Leo rising chart.
Right.
Which is totally different. Where do you go with that?
Totally different. I mean, I think of this, the sun as this idea of centrality and leadership, the sun being a central figure. So often I think there's a desire for, and it might sound cliche, but I think there is that desire to be seen in some way, or there's an emphasis on wanting to lead. Maybe you're not running for president, but there's something maybe in your local community or even within your family or friend group where you take on the role of that kind of more central figure.
Yes.
Around which other people are organized, or I think of the sun being like that quality of the hearth, like, or Leo kind of being that idea of the hearth, and
like the fire that gathers people in and that come together around kind of thing. Yeah. Which is a beautiful image if you think about the Leo rising, to go back to that breath or that life animation that we were talking about earlier. The Leo fire, it's that fixed fire. It's the flame that endures. And there is a real kind of loyal, warm, kind of steadfast quality that is very solar in its nature. So there's something about like the Leo rising chart with that solar sun energy. Is like, how do we warm this up? How do we bring more life or heat into this? Like, how do we get something going here? Which I think is a beautiful way of that, like, fire, solar light. Like, it gets it going.
Yeah.
I'm like, we're just basking in the idea. And there's, there can be a confidence, or I think you said like they want to be seen, and they're often seeking a place in their life where they can be seen, if you like. And as you said, it doesn't have to be like on the front page of a magazine or a newspaper level. If we think about our local communities or niche topics, we're obviously connecting through an interest in astrology, but there's all kinds of topics out there that will have people, leading or facilitating or coordinating, people coming together around that shared passion or that shared flame, if you like.
Yeah, one of the ancient significations, I think, in Nabu Mashar as well, is the desire for leadership.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah. I think people with the Leo rising chart, that's just, it's an instinct almost, this is and it's very much a solar thing to be the leader of something. And one little interjection I might add, Brian, as we're talking about this, we're talking about this in the context of like the planet managing or ruling the ascendant. Some people might be thinking, I really resonate with that, but that planet doesn't rule my ascendant, but it is in my first house. And I think that would be, maybe you aren't a Leo rising, but you do have the sun in the first house.
My ascendant.
Really resonate with some of those solar energies. And it's not exactly the same thing, but I'm just thinking for listeners to take away some of the pieces. Like maybe you don't have a Cancer rising, but you have the moon in the first house, and there are some elements of those lunar signatures that are really dominant in your.
Yeah, to take it a step further, if you want to go further with this, look at planets that are in the first house and the ascendant, and then also aspecting it, because they'll add their planetary flavor to how you express yourself as well.
This is where, like, we're just talking about one thing in the chart. We're just talking about the ascendant, which is the first house. And already there are a number of layered influences that can come in just to understand who you are as a person.
It's fascinating. And we started to talk about this and beyond, the scope of our talk today. But that idea of wherever the planet that's managing the ascendant is in the chart, those topics are going to be extremely important in guiding the life. And also that planet is going to do its thing in its own planetary way related to those topics that have to do with, the trajectory of your life. And
the way that I often think about it is, if we're at the ascendant of a chart, I think about like a light beam at the ascendant of the chart that is sort of tracking around, where is my managing planet? And there's a light beam
like a
from the ascendant. Yeah. Wherever that managing or ruling planet of the ascendant is. And that is a really primary focus or through line of energy and emphasis. And I love that we've added these pieces in as we're talking about the sun, like, let's just shed a bit more light on how we can get into this very core part of the chart.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is so true, isn't it? It's so lovely.
Yeah.
But we still have 3 planets to cover. So I know there'll be some rising signs that's thinking, don't forget about me. And we better not forget about the Mars ruled ascendants, because otherwise they might come for us.
That's right. Gotta watch out.
So what are the Mars ruled ascendants, and where do you go with those, Brian, or where do you start?
Well, something I always think about with Mars, thanks to you actually, because I think you pointed this out in a webinar, is that Mars is a planet of extremes. And, when we use that word to describe Mars, it's like, I think you've compared it to like knowing the right dose of something of extreme, like what's the right, And so there, oftentimes with Mars ruled people, I see this, there can be this extreme courage, right? Like this extreme audacity and courage to kind of do the thing that other people might want to do but can't do it or whatever. And that there can also be this kind of athletic, bold, again, very dynamic quality through how this person moves through life and how they get what they want. And so, I think it can be, there can be a risk-taking quality. It's interesting. Some of the ancients talk about uprooting and traveling as Martian significations. So I think about this heat that can be so characteristic of Mars, kind of driving the life. Like there might be this agitation at times of like, I don't want to do that anymore, or I got to make a break with this, or I'm severing from, from what I was doing before, or who I was, and I'm going to do something else. So there's, I just think about this idea of extreme and that isn't necessarily a bad, a bad thing, that it's like what's the right dose?
Yes. Yes. To what extreme are we going to extremes in some way to like repeat that? Yeah.
For some it's extreme, it's like skydiving, or it's expressing yourself through some sort of, extreme sport, or athleticism is also part of it.
I think there's a physicality to the Mars ruled ascendants, isn't there? So like the Aries risings, the Scorpio risings, there's sort of a driven or a determined, sometimes even a forceful quality I find with the Mars. And as you were talking, Brian, I was like, oh yeah, because now we're kind of getting into the other side of the sun in the Chaldean order. We can make the contrast back. One of the things that Venus ruled ascendants and Venus dominant charts do is they temper things. Not that they have a hot temper, but that tempering quality of like balancing or moderating. Whereas with Mars, we're like, no, let's take it out. Let's push it beyond, or let's go to that extreme. You know, I always think of Mars. One of the ways when I'm teaching students about the planets is I let them know that, you know, before we had the planet Uranus, which is one of the modern planets only discovered a couple hundred years ago, a lot of what we now give to Uranus was actually qualities represented partly by Mars. And so there's like a disruptive quality to Mars. There is a sense of, I think you alluded to this, like, let's cut it away or let's end this. You know, Mars is not afraid to cut things short or to cut out early if it's not going to plan. Or, you know, if I think about battles and strategy with Mars ruled ascendants, because they're always competing, you know, they're either competing against themselves or they have seen like a target or a challenge out in their environment that they want to pit themselves against. And, you know, they'll give it a shot, but they're not necessarily going to fight to the death. You know, maybe Scorpio rising is more inclined to that than Aries rising. But there is that sense of like, if we need to get out early, we will. And that disruptive quality of Mars, like we're not trying to keep the peace with Mars. We're not necessarily trying to follow the rules either. Like if we need to initiate or implement a new way of doing something, the Mars ruled ascendant is really good at that kind of breaking new ground kind of space.
Yeah, I think there has to be friction in some area of life or somewhere for someone who's Mars ruled to feel fulfilled. And sometimes that's, you know, through a really bold, intense like an endeavor that they, you know, participate in, or it's just the friction of life that has kind of this driving, motivating quality. So, yeah,
it's true. My husband is a Mars ruled ascendant, and I am not. And there's always this sense of like, you know, almost I don't know if righteous anger, but that sense of like, this could be different or this could be better. And I'm like, why are you worrying about that? Like, you know, you don't have to fight that battle kind of thing. And he's like, no, that's, you know, because there is an orientation towards where is the friction? Like, how can I get, and I think we alluded to this earlier. I can't remember exactly what you said, Brian, but something about this isn't to say this planet is better than the other. It's like, this is what is going to feel good for this planet. Like a Mars ruled ascendant is like, I don't mind the friction. I don't mind the competition. I don't mind the battle. I like that. I'm seeking the testing. Like, where is the field in which I can test myself, if you like?
Exactly.
And there are other planets ruling the ascendant that are like, oh, that's just too much hard work, you know? And I mean, Venus is like, well, I've made a cake. Would you like to come in for tea, you know?
Exactly.
So, yeah.
And sometimes, I mean, one way I think about Mars and even Saturn too, because they're considered malefics, is, you know, being in benefic territory like Venus or Jupiter isn't always a good thing. That can sometimes be indulgent, or, you know, it can be like relaxing and resting to an extreme as well. Whereas some of this friction that comes with a Mars or a Mars ruled person, I think, can be extremely powerful. I mean, you know, there's I'm just thinking like Mars and Capricorn, like that's just like
so that's playing the long game, you know,
right?
The instigation quality and that tendency towards activity. You know, there's I don't know if it's a busyness necessarily, but it's not sitting still. I think the Mars ruled ascendant is kind of the opposite of that. There is that orientation towards stirring things up or making things happen or getting things going. And there's something in that Mars piece, you know, of the battle or the competition. You know, sometimes Mars is fighting for or on behalf of someone or something or a certain group of people in society. And so that archetype of the warrior, you know, the warrior is often not fighting for themselves. They're fighting on behalf of a cause or a community that they feel very passionately about. And that is a real gift or skill, I think, that those Mars ruled ascendants bring in, is I'm willing to get down and dirty on behalf of this because that's how strongly I feel about it, for instance.
I just thinking of an example as you were sharing that about a friend I have. They have Scorpio rising, Mars is in the second in Sag, and they define kind of their life as me versus capitalism. Like it's like this.
Yeah,
it's almost kind of like a game.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, there's this kind of dynamic, bold, athletic, like mentally athletic way that they go about making money and spending money, and they've had lots of money and no money, and so it's very interesting to see how that inconsistency that can come with Mars too has played out in the life of like, I'm not doing that anymore, and I'm going to go this way. It's fascinating.
I love it. Oh my gosh, I feel like we could certainly do a part 2 of this episode with like a bunch of examples.
I know.
And then
that's where it comes to life.
It totally does. It totally does. Okay, so we have 2 planets left. So we have everybody's favorite and sometimes everybody's least favorite. Maybe we have the ones that are popular and not popular, which I don't know as an astrologer that I agree with, but I can see why people get there. So we have the Sagittarius rising, the Pisces rising. So we're in the territory of Jupiter is the manager or boss. And you used the example of the restaurant before, and sometimes to help people understand, I often say, like, think about you were working in an environment. Maybe you're working in a cubicle, or you're working in a clothing store or a cafe, and your boss or your manager is a Mars person. Like, are they going to, have a fast pace? Are they going to, set tests and challenges, or are they going to bring cupcakes in every day? You think about if this planet was managing your work environment, what would it be like? And then you can extrapolate out from that, like, this is the planet managing my life. And so if Jupiter is managing your life, if Jupiter was like the boss of you, what is Jupiter going to do, I mean, where should we start with Jupiter? Such a fun one.
What comes to mind first for you? Like, where does your mind go?
I mean, it just goes big, basically. It's just like everything, everywhere, all at once. I think there's something that I really appreciate about Jupiter, which is the orientation towards experiences as having value or as being opportunities for learning and growth. And so a Jupiter rising person, so Sag Ascendant or Pisces Ascendant, they can often be someone who's willing to say yes to have a go or just to see what it's like, that idea of just throw your hat in the ring and let's see where we go, there's an adventure to be had. Maybe there's some wisdom or some understanding to be gained. And so there's sort of that orientation that I think it's also an orientation towards maybe opportunity. I don't know if abundance is the right word, but there is an orientation towards growth. I think there's something called the growth mindset that, we can try things and see where we go. So it is a little bit more optimistic in its sense, maybe its willingness to take risks, willingness to take a leap of faith. We talked about the Mercury ruled ascendants wanting the data and the facts and the information. I think the Jupiter ruled ascendants are willing to take it on faith. They're willing to maybe trust, like jump and the net will appear kind of thing. Where there are other ascendants that are like, absolutely not. I need proof that net is there before I leap. But I think the Sag and Pisces ascendants are like, I'm good. I'm good to jump out of the plane and let's see where we go kind of thing. Not necessarily that, but, to take that symbolic kind of leap. So there's some of the things that come to mind for the Jupiter ascendant.
As you said that, I was thinking of a friend who's Sag rising, and we were talking recently how she's just like doing things with her business that she had tried before, and she's making money doing it, and it's just like, well, let's just see if it works. Like, let's just have a go, and it's kind of that, like, that trust, that faith that the net will appear if you take the leap.
Yes.
I think of generosity as a very Sagittarius.
Yes. I forget that. It's one of my favorites.
Like, generous with, like, I feel like the Jupiter ruled ascendants give the best hugs. Like, I think I've had one of the top 10 hugs of my life from a Sagittarius.
Yes, that big enveloping kind of like, get in here,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that generosity. I think there's an abundance of, affection and also support.
Yeah.
And then there can also be just this levity, I think, that comes with Jupiter, and this capacity for joy.
Yeah. Yeah, there is, I love that generosity. It's that sort of cheerleader energy where it's not generosity necessarily of a financial nature, but it's more of that spiritual uplifting.
Exactly.
Like, yes, you can do it. I believe in you. Have a go and let's figure it out together. It's almost like if you were parenting a young child and you're encouraging them, maybe you're teaching them to ride a bike or something, and you're like, we can try without the training wheels. Let's just see how we go. It's that sort of cheerleading, uplifting. It's that orientation towards it might work out and we won't know until we give it a shot.
Absolute tribe. Yeah.
We had this advertising campaign in Australia years ago. It's for tourism. And Australia as a country, it's not a Jupiter ruled ascendant, but it's a country as a chart that has a lot of planets in Sagittarius, including Jupiter in Sagittarius. And so the advertising campaign was like, you'll never know if you never go. And so it's like, you just got to go, and that's so very Jupiter, isn't it? Like you just got to give it a shot. Anyway, and I mean, I would just feel talking about Jupiter, I feel more uplifted and energized,
like, I know.
I'm going to say, I was excited that you were going to say more.
Well, something I learned recently that I've been really curious about is this idea that Jupiter is considered a rescue planet. And that idea is so, because I think freedom, or being unrestricted and unbound is really important for people who are Jupiter ruled, and that there's not only wanting to be liberated either spiritually or, from in life, but also there's, I think, an emphasis sometimes on liberating others or providing relief or support to others.
Yes. So Jupiter as the rescuer. So Jupiter as like the helper or the liberator, or, Jupiter in the mix is going to lighten whatever load might be there or help find doors towards, freedom or possibility, or maybe even, dare we say, happiness, because there is a joyful quality to Jupiter.
Yeah. And a lot of the ancient texts talk about looking at the ruler of the ascendant as indicating happiness, or how someone is happy in life. So definitely.
So the Jupiter ruled ascendant is just happy being happy. Whereas like the Mercury ruled ascendant is like, I'm happy with my data, for instance. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's like the qualities of the planet that manage your ascendant kind of describes your happy place or your happy activities, if you like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And professionally, I know Jupiter can signify like legal experts. So sometimes people are involved in law if they're Jupiter ruled.
Yep.
Scholars, but also it's like the sage archetype, or the wise one.
Yeah. The one who would have been like maybe a religious leader or the spiritual mystic kind of leader in the community. The one who had the wisdom, the big wisdom.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the challenging side, I think, of being Jupiter ruled is like excess, right? Or just too much of a good thing, or over committing, or jumping in too soon. Like that's a positive quality that we're talking about taking the leap, but sometimes it's not.
Sometimes it is premature. You bitten off more than you can chew. We had this saying when I was a kid growing up in my family. My grandma, who's Lebanese, would always say, if we put food on our plate and we didn't eat it. Now, of course, growing up with a Lebanese grandmother, you had to go for 2 or 3 helpings before, you could be full. But if you put food on your plate and you didn't eat it, it was like, your eyes are bigger than your tummy, And that's Jupiter, isn't it? Like I saw it and I wanted it all, but it was too much. It was too much for me, whatever it might have been. Yeah.
Like over promising and under delivering at times,
Yes.
So.
Yeah, Jupiter is like all hype and excitement, and sometimes you got to work with Jupiter to get the follow through and the finishing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's good. I like that we balanced because Jupiter often gives such a good rap that it's like, excess isn't always a good thing. Like too much wine and you'll know about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so we could stay in excess, but
Keep
now
going.
we need to curb. We need to put some
Need
limits
to
in
bring it
place.
down the notch.
We gotta get to the
Hey.
heat. And so we've got to talk about Saturn, the slowest of the Chaldean original planets, and the Capricorn and Aquarius rising, the Saturn-ruled ascendant charts. I always think of a slower approach for these two planets. You know, Jupiter qualitatively is a planet that has some associations with air. So we do get that enthusiasm and that movement and that uplifting quality because air as an element like moves and tends to lift. Whereas Saturn as a planet is qualitatively associated with Earth. So we have, like, I think we both were like, we're going to drop down, that there's a heaviness, but there's also a substantive quality with these ascendants that are ruled by Saturn. So it may be slower and maybe slower to get going, or sometimes there's a hesitancy or a caution. Sometimes there's a bit of a shyer quality, but they do
more restrained,
way more restrained,
maybe
right?
more inhibited.
Yeah. So because that's a spectrum, isn't it? Like shy, restrained, inhibited is like a spectrum of how are we managing maybe some fear here or some uncertainty. But there's such substantive quality to the Saturn-ruled ascendants that there's this real sense of enduring or lasting.
I was just going to say, staying on your path or choosing a path and sticking to it, staying in your lane.
Like this is my zone kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, there's more austerity. There's more...
There's
more restriction at times. Like sometimes people, I think, with some Saturn ruled, like particularly ascendant, but also I'm thinking of like a Capricorn moon is sometimes this idea of like, in order to have something, I have to go without something else, or there's, there can be that quality as well. And I think there can just be more of a need for solitude. It has kind of a lone wolf energy. Like I'm going alone. I'm not going to spend as much time with others. There can be this hermit-like quality that people who are Saturn-ruled. I think there's I
was going to say, I think it's important to acknowledge that for some ascendant types, there's a real comfort in that solitude. Like solitude doesn't mean being isolated or alone. It's like, oh no, this is a Zen zone. That type of person.
Totally.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think there's one of the authors says that it's much thought but little speech is a Saturnian rule person. So there can be a lot of thinking and contemplating and maybe not a lot to say. Also, I've seen new people recently who have they're involved in agriculture, which is so interesting to me because that is an ancient signification of Saturn and is working with the land. And so it's so wild when you see someone today. Like I have a friend who's Aquarius rising, Saturn in the ascendant in the first, and she runs ultra marathons. So she's got that endurance quality of the best of Saturn. And she also is a farmer, like she farms for a living. So she checks many of the Saturnian boxes for having a Saturn all of a sudden. It's pretty wild.
I think there's so much about agriculture and land and cultivating like time and seasons and nature that is tied to Saturn. And sometimes we forget that in modern life because I think many of us are disconnected from the land as the source of like nourishment and sustenance. And when we bring that back, it's so beautiful. And to Saturnian qualities, something you said, there's like the deliberation or the deliberate qualities and the diligence of Saturn, that sense of preparation or planning. When you said a lot of thinking and not a lot of talking, there's a beautiful quote by Rumi, which is about deliberation and about sniffing with your wisdom nose and the way that a dog like sniffs before it sits down. I'm sort of paraphrasing the whole quote from Rumi, and the idea of like taking time to deliberate before you decide. And that sort of piece from Rumi to me is so Saturnian around the deliberation is valuable, even though it means a slower pace. So there's some discerning sort of like, let's take the time to do our research and prepare so that once we kind of lock in our plan or our agreement, which is, Saturn is like, we want to lock things in, but then we want to, it's like we've written it in stone. We're going to stick with it. Like it's something we want to be able to sustain over an extended period.
Mm-hmm.
So there might be something I would say about Saturn ruled ascendants having this orientation towards longer timelines as well.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas some of our quicker moving planets like the moon or Mercury, there is more variety and flux to those planets, and their timeline orientation can sometimes be like shorter and therefore more changeable as well. Whereas Saturn, as the original most outer planet, the kind of natural limit of the solar system to the naked eye, there's something here about let's take our time, let's be looking further ahead or further down the line. And so if you're a Saturn ruled ascendant, you're not operating according to rush and immediacy. You're oriented towards the next 5, 10, even longer years. And that changes the way you frame things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think there's...
consolidation is another word I've heard you use for Saturn, and I really like that as well. As maybe your identity is just a little more contained than some of those other ruled, some of those other planets.
I think there is a containment, and sometimes I think one of the, we talked a little bit about the shadow side of Jupiter, for instance. A little bit of the shadow side of Saturn is that container can feel like this impenetrable wall. And
isolation.
You can be maybe more isolated than you need to be or have to be, and it can be harder for others to get in. So
and I think with that, it can sometimes take Saturnian ruled people longer to understand who they are, or longer to, have a sense of themselves. Like it just takes time to mature into that.
Exactly. Yeah. That's one thing we do say about the Saturn ruled ascendants, isn't it? That they often describe a timeline where they get better over time. So like a fine wine, there's a real opening up and a depth of awareness or sense of self that just gets more and more as you get older in years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say on our Saturn ruled ascendants, Brian?
I think that covers it.
Yeah. The agriculture, the lone wolf. Yeah.
I know since we were talking about the shadow side, stubbornness can be also part of that. It's just like being so contained or so kind of, rigid about a particular way of thinking or ways of living that can be challenging at times.
Yeah. I think it can seem really restrictive, and sometimes for the person it feels protective or safe. It's
right.
That's like the different side. And so some people with these Saturn ruled ascendants might feel, oh, I am a bit restricted, and other people well, I just feel like I'm keeping myself safe. But I think the perspective of that can change over time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so such good discussion, Brian. Oh my gosh. I feel like we could talk.
I know, this is fun.
So hopefully this is helping people get a sense of some of these kind of core qualities and tendencies, or even just the tone of energy that is really impressed upon you according to the planet that rules your ascendant in your chart.
Yeah, looking to that planet and its qualities and characteristics, you can ask yourself, how am I like that planet, or how do I get what I want out of life by kind of embodying the planet in a way as that planet manages my life. And I'd love to hear in the comments, I'd love to hear maybe you could write your ascendant, the ruler of your ascendant, and a little bit about what resonated with your experience. It's always fun to see how it lands.
It's so
and you learn a lot that way too, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
So,
It's learning through like, how is this for you? And how did it show up for you? And
Yes.
is it like for me? And so, yeah, definitely let us know in the comments below what you resonated with and how you see your managing or ruling planet of your ascendant, how you see that showing up in your chart and life. Okay, so a couple of little messages. If you are interested in learning astrology, if you want to learn about your birth chart, your ascendant, your ruling planet, my beginner astrology class starts September 22nd. We're actually doing the once a year intake for students starting September 6th. So if you want to join a community of like-minded students who will be starting at the beginning with astrology, you can do that now. We have a special bundle offer that is available just for these 2 weeks in September. So I'll put the link below, but you can pop over to kellysastrology.com if you want to sign up more there. Brian, I know people are going to want to hear more from you. I know your website is brian-forman.com. What can people connect with you around? You're doing consults with astrology. Do you want to tell people about? Yeah.
Yes, I offer consultations. I specialize in natal and horary astrology. So if you have a question that's been on your mind and you'd like an answer, I'd love to work with you in that capacity. I think that covers it. Natal and horary consults. I also offer tutoring. Sometimes people want to learn. I've had a few clients who wanted to learn horary astrology, or they already have some kind of understanding and they're interested in going a little bit deeper with that material. So I offer that as well. And I'm also on Instagram at Brian Forman, but that's a lot of taking pictures and sourdough and stuff like that. I'm not
I think people love
astrology on there.
Yeah. But I will find you there. Yeah,
exactly.
So Brian Forman on Instagram or brian-forman.com for your website.
Yeah, and it's Brian with an I, and there's no E in Forman, just Forman.
I love it.
Maybe we'll link it below.
Well, we'll definitely, I was just going to say, we haven't got enough Mercury going on today between the two of us. We'll definitely put the link below so that you can easily find Brian. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, this is so great.
Fun.
I wish it were in person, and I
know.
Give you a hug.
And we could have had cake if we were in person.
Yeah, totally.
Exactly. For sure.
Awesome, Kelly.
Well, thank you so much, Brian. And thanks everyone for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Catch everyone next time. Bye for now.
Bye.